On this week's Vaticano, U.S. President Barack Obama visits Pope Francis. We get reactions from Rome's Pontifical North American College and this young Mexican-American who spoke to the Pope about U.S. immigration policy. The Pope highlights confession during the 24 Hours of Prayer for Reconciliation initiative. He also meets with the deaf and blind in a special audience. In other news, Roman churches are preparing for a prayer vigil and a huge youth gathering during the canonizations this month of Popes John Paul II and John XXIII. 19 homes for victims of 2011's earthquake are built in Guatemala, thanks to donations from Pope Francis, and a Vatican official from Germany publishes a book on the Stations of the Cross for Lent. And finally, Iraqi Christian students travel to Rome on a school trip, and this week's Passion Relic is the Nails of Christ, coming up. U.S. President Barack Obama made his first visit to Pope Francis on March 27. With two interpreters present, they spoke for 52 minutes about the rights to religious freedom and conscientious objection, as well as the immigration reform. Obama gave the Pope seeds from the White House gardens to plant in the pontifical villas. The Pope, in return, gave him 2 medals and a red-covered copy of his Evangelii Gaudium.
Very remarkable. There were people lining the streets, traffic was stopped. It was really interesting to see how big an influence American leaders have when they visit other countries. I'm sure they spoke about some of their common overlapping elements, the concern for the poor, immigration reform especially, and I'm sure they touched on areas of difference as well. They both seemed to be very sincere, and I'm sure it was a very sincere conversation. I think there's a lot of room for both the Holy See and the United States to work together on income inequality and on immigration reform, but also I do hope they spoke about areas of difference for the Health and Human Services mandate, to try to give the United States a little better understanding of where Catholics are coming from on this issue.
I just think it's so marvelous. So many heads of states are coming to Rome to visit this wonderful Pope. Obviously, he has a great way of attracting heads of state, and that really opens a mode of discussion between heads of states on issues that are common, but on issues that really need to be addressed as well. I think that Pope Francis would have been very clear on the ethical issues such as abortion, such as the family, such as gay marriage, and what he has called a globalization of indifference, where we have to be very concerned about protecting human life from the first moment of conception to its natural end and on every stage. I'm talking about the unborn, I'm talking about the old, I'm talking about the weak, the handicapped. That is our concern. When we reach the human person, that is the real common ground.
The American president also met with the Italian president and prime minister during the one-day visit to Rome. A Mexican-American 10-year-old traveled to the Vatican to tell Pope Francis about her father currently in prison in the U.S. facing deportation. His crime entering the States without documentation 14 years ago. Just a day before Obama's visit, Jersey, who hasn't seen her father for 2 years, told the Pope her story, hoping that he could move Obama's conscience to offer her father legal status.
I hope that this will make a change to the world, because right now we all need Barack Obama's help, because we are all suffering the same thing, and it's not fair that he's having his daughters while we're suffering. When I first met Pope Francis, I was very happy because I finally got to meet him, and he blessed me, and then he gave me a kiss on my forehead, and he told me that he is gonna talk to our President Barack Obama in the United States. Well, my family used to be very happy because every time we would go to the park, and my dad would always play soccer with my brother and sister, and they would try to win. Yeah, my dad, he works in construction, and every day he came home very tired, and his hands were always with dust and cement. And he always took off his shoes because he was always tired.
Jersey came to the Vatican without her parents as a voice for the thousands of other Americans who are children of illegal immigrants. Her mother, a housewife with 5 children, is now cooking and cleaning houses while living the terror of having her husband deported.
We are a delegation made up of different organizations. We are 17 people in total who have come to send President Obama a message through the Pope. We have come to ask the Pope to intercede for all these families that are being deported. like Jersey's family, who is being separated. Jersey came to help us give this message. She's our spokesperson. We have also come to give the Pope 1,500 letters written by children that are suffering the same separation of families because of the problem that the United States is experiencing. President Obama has deported over 2 million people. He said that he would deport criminals, and in reality, he is deporting fathers with families whose only crime has been to contribute to the country because they are working and to have entered without papers. But in reality, they are not criminals. So for this reason, we are here, fighting for immigration reform.
I'd like to tell the kids that to keep like fighting for their parents, because one day they'll have their parents back and they will never be separated again.
Children born in the U.S. have automatic American citizenship even if their parents are illegal. The U.S. bishops have also taken action to keep families united, celebrating Mass at the border with Mexico last week to raise awareness of the situation. The Church is preparing for the canonizations of John Paul II and John XXIII on April 27. A gathering with youth will be held on April 22nd at the Basilica of St. John Lateran with the two promoters of these saints' causes. The purpose is to witness holiness to youth.
Young people are a privileged audience because they are those who have not historically met John the 23rd, and the very young probably hardly remember John Paul II. So it is very important, and we want young people themselves to be talking about these two giants of history, these two big saints, especially to understand why they are saints, about the secret to a successful, truly happy life. Because a saint is a man who has lived happily and his existence is blessed, despite experiencing the trials and sufferings that we know these two men did. But they lived all of that in God. The purpose is to transmit the faith to new generations.
A prayer vigil will be held all night long the day before the canonizations. Churches of Rome's Historic Center will be open for confession and prayer in various languages with biblical passages and writings from the new saints. Stay with us. After the break, the Pope also goes to confession during a penitential ceremony, and 19 homes are built for Guatemala's 2011 earthquake victims thanks to Pope Francis. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano. On March 28, Pope Francis held a penitential liturgy at St. Peter's Basilica. Many churches around the world offer 24 hours of confession and adoration to celebrate the Feast of Pardon. Even the Pope himself went to confession, practicing what he preaches. The following day, Pope Francis received a group of visually and hearing impaired people in audience.
Ich selber bin nicht sehr religiös, aber ich halte sehr viel vom Papst. Er hat eine bestimmte Ausstrahlung und vor allem ist er sehr entgegenkommend zu Menschen und besonders auch zu Behinderten. Er respektiert das sehr. Im Audienz war unheimlich viele Leute. Der Saal war total überfüllt und war erstaunt, weil alle sehr geduldig waren, obwohl der Papst nicht gekommen ist. Und als er kam, war er plötzlich da und dann sind alle aufgesprungen und war auch sehr viel Gefühl dabei, war ganz toll und der Papst war so ruhig, hat so schön zugehört. Als der Papst zu den Menschen näher kam, kam viel Gefühle rüber, Handküsse, Bussi, Bussi, so viel Herz. Also habe ich noch nie gesehen, so nah, so zuvorkommen, war sehr schön.
Most of the deaf gathered in Paul VI Hall were Italian, and organizers had offered only Italian Sign Language interpretation. That, said German participants, was the only problem on the day, that they were unable to understand the Pope's words. Then, during his Sunday Angelus, Pope Francis told thousands gathered at St. Peter's Square the importance about opening oneself up to grace.
La nostra vita a volte è simile a quella del cieco, che si è aperto alla luce.
Our life is sometimes similar to that of the blind man, who opened himself to the light, who opened himself to God, who opened himself to His grace. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is a bit like one of the doctors of the law. We judge others, and even the Lord, from the height of our own pride. Today we are invited to open ourselves to the light of Christ in order to bear fruit in our lives, to eliminate behavior that is not Christian, behavior that is sinful. We must repent of this. We must eliminate these behaviors in order to walk decisively on the path of holiness, which has its origin in baptism. We ourselves have also been enlightened by Christ in baptism, so that, as St. Paul reminds us, we can act as children of light, with humility, patience, and mercy. These teachers of the law had neither humility, nor patience, nor mercy.
Né pazienza né misericordia.
During his weekly general audience at St. Peter's Square on Wednesday, the Pope spoke about the sacrament of marriage. With this week's audience, the Pope closed his catechesis on the sacraments.
Queridos hermanos y hermanas, la catequesis de hoy está centrada en el matrimonio.
Today's catechesis is focused on matrimony. This sacrament introduces us to the design of God, who created man in His image, capable of loving. Male and female, He created them. And in the second place, this sacrament confers on them a mission to manifest in simple and daily things the love of Christ for His church, giving themselves in fidelity and service.
Manifestar en las cosas simples y cotidianas el amor de Cristo a su iglesia, entregándose en la fidelidad y en el servicio.
19 homes for families who were victims of an earthquake and floods during 2011 have now been opened in the middle of Lent. The construction of this neighborhood, which will include a chapel, has been completed thanks to a donation of Pope Francis and efforts of the local church and nunciature. President of the Pontifical Council, Cor Unum, Cardinal Robert Serra, traveled to Guatemala as a sign of support to the affected families.
Nel realizzare la cappella vogliamo anche mostrare che Cor Unum.
With the construction of this chapel, we want to show that Cor Unum, as Pope Francis wishes, does not just deal with man's material problems, but rather also takes care of spiritual problems. In relation to this, I've lived firsthand the joy of these families who have finally received a properly built house after having lost everything during the earthquake, from the house to all the personal goods. Therefore, finding a home and a chapel has filled them with joy and hope. Cor Unum takes a lot of care of Latin America, a very important continent for the Church since it is a continent that constantly grows. And even if it shows to have grave problems of inequality, a few are very rich and the majority are very poor, it is a continent that transmits a lot of joy because the Church grows and the poor, although they don't have anything, have everything because they have God. They believe, they pray, and they abandon themselves to the hands of God. And this is, for me, something marvelous that all Latin America breathes.
Molto bella e si vede questo in America Latina.
The Pontifical Council Cor Unum was founded by Paul VI in 1971. Since then, it's in charge of making the Pope's charity visible in concrete projects. But according to Cardinal Serra, it's a charity that goes beyond just material aid.
La sfida più grande è di non imporre niente ai poveri.
Cor Unum's biggest challenge is not to impose anything on the poor, to help them without imposing a way of thinking, a way of seeing life, a way of behaving. We need to always offer them our help with respect. This is our challenge, to help the weakest to build a Christian anthropological vision of life itself, taking its culture, its history, its circumstances into account, but through the light of the gospel.
Con la luce del Vangelo.
During his Lenten message this year, Pope Francis appealed to the conversion of hearts through concrete charity and through detachment of riches.
Mi sembra che il Papa ha chiarito molto bene.
I believe that the Pope has clarified very well the notion of poverty, that it is an evangelical value and that we need to always appreciate it. We do not need to destroy or fight against poverty, but we rather need to fight against misery. It is not admissible that man lives under inhumane conditions. All men have the right to live a dignified life as a child of God. Let's say that this point is one of the most important ones of this year's Lenten message. The Holy Father helps us distinguish between poverty and misery. The Holy Father wants a poor church for the poor. What does this mean? He doesn't talk about a church that doesn't have any goods, but rather of a detached church. A detached church detached from evil, from jealousy, from pride and poverty. The Pope talks about a church that goes out of itself and that carries the gospel to the poorest.
Evangelizzare, a portare il Vangelo ai poveri.
All donations given to the Pontifical Council's Cor Unum as charity ultimately paid forward for the Pope's own intentions. For more information, visit the Council's website at www.corunum.va. Stay with us after the break. A Vatican official launches a book for Lent, and this week's Passion Relic is the Nails of Christ. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano. The world abounds with suffering. Pope Francis has pointed multiple times to the pain of the poor, the outcasts, the forgotten, and the marginalized. The Lenten season gives the Church and every single Christian the chance to convert, repent, and do penance, and by doing so, he participates in the suffering of Christ. A new book, a meditation on the way of the cross, helps the reader to set his heart on the salvific suffering of Christ.
The world is full of suffering, full of pain, full of problems, but I would say the life of every human being is full of pain. We cannot avoid the cross in our life. So for everybody, the day will come when he has to be confronted with the cross, with the suffering. And it's a human experience that we don't want to feel alone when we suffer. We need a hand that helps us. We need friends. We need someone who can share the pain with us. And so looking at Christ who carries his cross is not another burden on our shoulders, but on the contrary, we can give him our cross. When we see him suffering for us, it becomes at least a little bit easier to go with him, to go the Via Dolorosa, to affront to confront us with the pain in our daily life.
This particular Via Dolorosa, or Way of Sorrow, is a special book.
When I was meditating the Stations of the Cross, I was wondering, what would Jesus say to me right now? What does he think right now? What does he feel right now? What does he want to communicate to me if I was on the Via Dolorosa with him? So I tried to let him speak. So the special thing is that it's Christ who speaks to us. He tells us what he feels, what he thinks, what he wishes, what he likes me to do. And this is not only spiritual poetry, so to say, it's reality. Jesus is suffering as a human being, yes, but he is the Son of God, he is the true God, so his knowledge is illimited. He knows me, he sees me. I'm in front of his eyes when he goes to Calvary. So he does all this for me, and he tries to communicate to me. And when I open my heart in prayer to his words, he whispers to me, telling me what he feels, telling me above all that he loves me, and he goes this way just because of me.
Lent is a special time of grace and of conversion. If the Via Dolorosa is shared with Christ, then it can be turned into Via Amorosa, a way of love.
The best time to pray the way of the cross is, of course, the time of Lent, when the whole church is preparing herself for the great celebration of Easter. Because the way of the cross teaches us what Jesus did for us. And when we do understand what he suffered for us, we can understand much better his victory on Easter Sunday.
Before the U.S. invasion of Iraq 11 years ago, there were about 1.5 million Christians there. Now there is less than 450,000. Idbil, a Kurdish town in northern Iraq, has been receiving some of the refugees in the last few years. Foreign investment in the area has helped a Catholic school take its students to Rome, where the Pope himself offered them a greeting during his Sunday Angelus.
It was amazing. I didn't believe that I would ever see him, but it was great. We still have Christians in Iraq, yes, and we are willing to help Christianity to grow.
It's very interesting to be in Rome because it has, like, when we visit somewhere, it's big places. There are big places.
There are so many great things I can see here. Like, I like so many things. The Pope is great.
More than a challenge, I would say it's making a dream come true. This school is a dream that Archbishop Bashar Warda has had for several years, and we're very happy to be part of the reality it's becoming. We've already been open for 3 years. We have several hundred students, and this is just the beginning. We're in the middle of our international accreditation process with the IB, the International Baccalaureate Organization. So one of the challenges we're facing right now is the completion of that process, which is very, very vigorous. But everyone is on board. Everyone, the church and the local community has been very supportive, and we are almost there.
Erbil and Iraq, as you know, there were some conflicts and fightings and wars in that area. And for Christians, many Christians have fled and left Iraq. So the challenge is to make them come back to Iraq. So we have to make something there for the Christians to come back to their country, to come back to their land and live there and raise their children there. So education is one of the most important things that can make Christians come back to their country and to their land. So, and it's a hope for the Christians in that area to stay in their own country.
With the pilgrimage, the group looks to give hope not only to the pilgrims, but also to the suffering Christian population back at home. We've heard about the column of the scourging, the crown of thorns, and the cross of the Lord. This week, Father Bernardo Estrada tells us about the nails used during the crucifixion.
Usually, they say that there were 4 nails in the cross. 2 for the hands, 1 for the feet, and 1 for the title in the cross. And then in Santa Croce in Jerusalem, we have 2 nails. that they were conserved. The other two, I am not sure, my baby. One is in France, also with the close to the crown of thorns that we have in the Saint Chapels, and also with the point of the lance that is also in France.